that in dark earth many days had lain. Love lives again, that with the dead has been. Love is come again, like wheat that springeth green. In the grave they laid him, love whom man had slain, thinking that never he would wake again. Laid in the earth like grain that sleeps unseen. Love is come again, like wheat that springeth green. Forth he came at Easter, like the risen grain. He that for 3 days in the grave had lain, quick from the dead, my risen Lord is seen. Love is come again, like wheat that springeth green. When our hearts are wintry, grieving or in pain, thy touch can call us back to life again. Fields of our hearts that dead and bare have been, love is come again, like wheat that springeth green.
Love is come again, like wheat that springeth green. Love that hatred slain. Love is come again. I thank you, God, for most this amazing day, for the leaping greenly spirits of trees and a blue true dream of sky, and for everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes. I, who have died, am alive again today. And this is the sun's birthday. This is the birthday of life and love and wings and of the gay, great, happening, illimitably earth. How should tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, breathing, any, lifted from the know of all nothing, human merely being, doubt, unimaginable you? Now the ears of my ears awake, and now the eyes of my eyes are opened. E. Cummings, that great poet who happened to be a Unitarian, a preacher's kid, in fact, he expresses a faith that I admire, a faith that can be challenging to hold on to in the face of the world's relentless reminders of injustice and cruelty, in the face of a Good Friday world. So yes, Easter is about spring, about illimitably earth, gay, great happening. It's also this inevitability of changing seasons, about life re-emerging, about pagan traditions of eggs and bunnies, of signs of fertility and growth, of new life emerging just as all seems barren. Yes, Easter is about spring, but it's about something else too. Living in this time of climate catastrophe, among other catastrophes, I wonder how much is inevitable about spring. What is truly immutable about this season that we take for granted? As we shift the climate, spring itself changes. Flowers that once thrived could falter or disappear. Scientists monitoring a reserve over in Davis, UC Davis, they've watched the diversity of native wildflowers drop significantly over the past 20 years due to our drier winters. It is possible that we will change spring, perhaps even make it unrecognizable as we've known it eventually. The possible and the inevitable. These there are some destructive forces that are inevitable. Our sun will eventually burn itself out in some 14 billion years or whatever it is. I suppose that that's inevitable. Death certainly is inevitable. Each of our own personal deaths, as well as this long-term death of our planet, our solar system. But there's also destruction that's possible but not inevitable. And that's another thing that Easter is about. The story according to Mark, the last chapter. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. You just imagine these grieving women, grieving a beloved, on their way to the tomb, and they'd been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back, and as they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He's been raised. He's not here. Look, there's the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. And then it ends. That's it. Thus, the first telling of the Easter story ends in that gospel known as Mark. What a weird story. What a strange ending. So Mark was the first of the canonical gospels, the first written. The others, Luke and Matthew and John, coming decades or maybe even centuries, in the case of John, later. And there are other endings to the book of Mark, but biblical scholars say that the earliest manuscripts we know of end right there, not with a risen Jesus visiting his friends, but with the women who've gone to the tomb to lament and care for his body, fleeing in terror and amazement. They've gone to lament because a great injustice has been done. They've gone to lament because a life of one they hold dear has been destroyed, not by the inevitability of death, but by the violence of an empire hell-bent on maintaining control. The theologian Walter Brueggemann describes the process of how the pain of oppression leads to the expression of lamentation. And ultimately, that expression of lamentation offers a release of creative energy for new possibilities. This process, I think, might be inevitable. Pain leading to grief, to lamentation, opening finally to a release of creative energies. Sometimes, as with the Velveteen Rabbit, it takes a long time. But that process is perhaps inevitable. We don't need to look back, of course, 2 millennium to see a story of crucifixion, of state-sanctioned violence being wrought unjustly on a citizen of an oppressed class. As I listened this week to George Floyd's trial, Derek Chauvin's trial unfold, I thought about how death is inevitable, trauma even inevitable, perhaps like the primal trauma of being born or giving birth, but that George Floyd's traumatic death, that was not inevitable. State-sanctioned violence is not inevitable. Empire is not inevitable. The brutality of racist policing is not inevitable. And contemplating the history of trials of police officers in our country for violent acts like this, we also have to conclude that justice is not inevitable. Esau McCauley is a professor of the New Testament at Wheaton College and a contributing opinion writer at the New York Times. He wrote about the meaning of Easter in the Black church this week. He talked about knowing how to grieve and lament, having rituals to grieve and lament, but the harder thing, he says, but hope is much harder to come by. The women did not go to the tomb looking for hope. They were searching for a place to grieve. They wanted to be left alone in despair. And the terrifying prospect of Easter, he writes, is that God called these women to return to the same world that crucified Jesus with a very dangerous gift, hope in the power of God, the unending reservoir of forgiveness and an abundance of love. It would make them seem like fools. Who could believe such a thing, he asks. To know the depth of the tomb, to lament from the bottom of one's heart, to know the kind of grief that makes you want to curl up in the tomb yourself, wait for someone to roll the stone back across the door and be done with it all, to know the depth of the tomb, and then to be called back to the world to live a life of faith. In Elizabeth Lesser's book, Broken Open, How Difficult Times Can Help Us Grow, she writes, when we descend all the way down to a bottom of a loss and dwell patiently with an open heart in the darkness and pain, dwell patiently with an open heart in the darkness and pain, we can bring back up with us the sweetness of life and the exhilaration of inner growth. When there's nothing left to lose, we find the true self, the self that is whole, that is enough, the self that no longer looks to others for definition or completion or anything but companionship on the journey. And so here's one more thing that Easter is about, another inevitability, that in the face of death, of destruction, when our hearts are emptied all the way out and we find ourselves at the bottom of a loss, that's not the end of the story. The story doesn't end with a crucifixion. It doesn't end with the horrific footage of Derek Chauvin's knee on George Floyd's neck. It doesn't even end with this trial. It doesn't end with lamentation and despair, nor does it end with a tidy happily ever after. It doesn't end with a failed revolution or a successful, joyous overthrow of empire. The story ends with the bewilderment of resurrection. Resurrection, which we know is not possible. It's not possible. And yet, resurrection, which we know is inevitable. The forces that brought out of countless possibilities the occurrence of life emerging on our planet, those same forces will resurrect out of the eventual explosion of the sun yet more new possibilities. It doesn't end Our contemporary UU theologian, Rebecca Parker, she encourages us rationalist UUs, we must doubt our doubt. We must doubt our doubt that there is grace. We must open ourselves to the possibility that there are sources beyond ourselves that sustain us, transform us, save us, that hold us tight in the arms of life. We must open ourselves to the possibility that this grace is already here, that it has been given, is being given, will be given. Resurrection is not possible, but it is inevitable. I, who have died, am alive again today, and this is the Son's birthday. This is the birthday of life and love and wings and of the gay, great, happening, illimitably earth. And while there is injustice, anesthetization, or evil, there moves a holy disturbance, a benevolent rage, a revolutionary love, protesting, urging, insisting that which is sacred will not be defiled. Those who bless the world live their life as a gesture of thanks for this beauty and this rage. They're passing around eggs in Myanmar today. Dyed eggs, beautifully emblazoned with slogans like Spring Revolution and We Must Win, in defiance of the military junta ruling the country. Because Easter is about this too, about people choosing to align themselves with the forces that sustain life, protesting, urging, insisting that which is sacred will not be defiled, choosing among the great myriad possibilities, choosing to bless the world, choosing in the face of the inevitability of trauma and death to place faith in the terrifying possibility of resurrection. Professor Macaulay, he concludes his opinion piece in the New York Times like this. He says, as we leave the tombs of quarantine, a return to normal would be a disaster unless we recognize that what we are going back to is a world desperately in need of healing. For me, he says, the source of that healing is an empty tomb in Jerusalem. The work that Jesus left his followers to do includes showing compassion and forgiveness and contending for a just society. It involves the ever-present offer for all to begin again. The weight of this work fills me with a terrifying fear, especially in light of all those who have done great evil in his name. Who is worthy of such a task? Like the women, the scope of it leaves me too with a stunned silence. The ever-present offer for all to begin again. And you, where in your life would you receive this inevitable possibility of resurrection? What yes beats in your heart longing to be set free? If you utter faith, the process of healing force. No outcomes guaranteed, but the process itself irresistible. If you had faith like that, how would you choose to bless the world? I would like to be buried alive, writes the poet Jess Reynolds. Spirit, plant me. Part the soil until there's room for me to curl up around myself and wait. I know there's life sleeping somewhere in this seed, just waiting for water and sun. Spirit, plant me. This is our covenant. You on your knees, up to your elbows in dirt. Me stripped bare of bark or shell, risking wind and snow to give myself the chance to grow. This Easter, may you find yourself buried in the soil, stripped bare of bark or shell, and there find spirit on its knees. Find that holy, mysterious force tending you, preparing you to participate in an impossible, in an inevitable resurrection. May it be so. And amen.